Hi everybody, Storyteller Will Hornyak with a story from Ireland. A long time ago in County Roscommon, Ireland, there was a little village, and the name of the village is important. The name of the village was Ballagherdeen. You want to try that with me? Ready? Ballagherdeen. That's right, you've got it. Well, in Ballagherdeen there lived a man who was a peddler. And every day, you see, he'd put his sack on his back and he'd walk the rocky roads of County Roscommon. And whenever he came to a fair, a square, a marketplace, well, anywhere where a few people gathered, he would spread out his wares and he'd call out, "Pots and pans for sale, knives and needles, ribbons and bows, come and buy them here." Well, oftentimes it would be a young boy, maybe 10 years old or so. He'd be the first to come up. And he might pick up something like a pocket knife and say, "Peddler, peddler, how much for this knife?" And the peddler of Ballagherdeen, well, he would take one look at that boy and he'd know right away if the boy could afford the knife or not. You see, he often peddled among very poor people. And if he realized the boy probably couldn't afford the knife, he'd say something like, "Lad, you know that knife, the one you got in your hand there? Now, for some reason, that pocket knife has been doing nothing but weighing me down for months. I've been looking for someone just to take it off my hands, just to lighten my load a little bit. Why would you be willing to do that for me?" And of course, what do you think the boy would say? Yeah, you're right. He'd say, I would, sir, I would." And that boy, he'd take that little pocket knife and he'd go running off. And he would be so happy. And the peddler of Ballagherdeen would take some of that happiness for his payment. Well, you see, the fact of the matter was, the peddler of Ballagherdeen, he gave away a lot more than he sold. And, of course, the townspeople, they always noticed this. And they would fold their arms and they'd shake their heads and they'd say, "Aye, look at that fool, the peddler of Ballagherdeen. He gives away more than he sells, and someday he'll have nothing to peddle, and he'll have nothing to eat as well." Well, the townspeople were right. When the peddler of Ballagherdeen would make his way home, he would often be followed by the stray dogs. And most people would just shoo dogs like that away, but the peddler, he often stopped, and he'd reach into his sack, and he'd pull out some bread and some moldy cheese, and he'd feed the dogs, and then he would make his way home. He lived at the crossroads near the town, and he lived inside a little mud and wattle hut. It was the cheapest kind. But outside of his hut, he had a fine, beautiful, grand cherry tree. And everybody in County Roscommon, and far beyond Roscommon, they knew the peddler's cherries, they were sweeter, they were bigger, they were more juicy, they were just more beautiful and abundant than any cherry in the whole place. Everybody knew that. And nobody knew it better than the blackbirds. Oh, and they'd come swooping out of the skies, and they would eat up half of the peddler's cherries. And then he would let the rabbits come out of the fields, and wouldn't they munch upon the potatoes and his carrots? And of course the neighbors, they would notice this too. And they'd fold their arms and they'd shake their heads and they'd say, "Peddler, man, shoo those thieving critters away, they're robbing you blind. There'll come a time you have nothing to peddle, nothing to eat." And the peddler, he'd say, "There's nothing robbing me. Nothing sings as sweetly as a bird when it's in that cherry tree of mine. And the rabbits, they're good company, I get lonely sometimes." Oh, but the neighbors would say, "Peddler, someday you'll have nothing to peddle and nothing to eat, and you'll go to bed cold and hungry." And you know what? The neighbors, they were right. For finally there did come a day when the peddler, he had nothing left to peddle, and he had nothing to eat as well. And on that winter the snow came early and it stayed late. And every night the peddler of Ballagherdeen went to bed cold and hungry and hungry and cold and cold and hungry. And if you've ever done that for a while, you know that you're bound to have an amazing dream. And one night, the peddler of Ballagherdeen, he dreamt that he saw standing right there at the foot of his bed, St. Patrick himself, a very important man to the Irish people. And old St. Patrick in the dream, he said, "Peddler, get up, man. I want you to walk to the town of Dublin, the biggest city in Ireland. Find the Liffey Bridge that spans the Liffey River, and stand upon the bridge, and you'll hear what you're to hear, and you will see what you're to see. Now get up, Peddler, and go." Well, the Peddler of Ballagherdeen, foolish man that he was, he put on his thin rag of a coat, he listened to the dream, and he walked out the door and down the road, and he was just so cold, he couldn't go any further, and he turned around and went home. But the second night, St. Patrick appeared again to him, and he said, "Peddler, I'm telling you now, man, you've got to get up and make your way to Dublin and find the Liffey Bridge, and you'll hear what you're to hear. Now get up, man, and go." And that night, well, he got up, and he got down the stairs, and he got out the door, but he was so hungry and so weak, he just couldn't take another step, and he went back to bed. But the third night, St. Patrick appeared again, and he said, "Now listen to me, Peddler. I'm not going to be coming again. You've got to make your way to Dublin. You've got to find the Liffey Bridge. You'll hear what you're to hear. Now, man, get up and go." Well, that night the Peddler, he got up and he made his way out the door and down the road, but he was so cold, and he was so hungry, and he was so weak. But he just put one foot in front of the other, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked, and it took him 3 days to make his way all the way to Dublin. And he arrived just as the sun was rising. And the Peddler, he was excited. He'd never seen the city before. And he found the Liffey Bridge, and he stood there. And all day long he waited, and he listened, and he watched. And he watched and listened and waited. And the people, they crossed the bridge this way, going to the shops, and they crossed the bridge that way, going to the fairs, and they crossed the bridge this way, and that way, this way, going to the markets. And all day long he listened and waited and watched, and waited and listened and watched, and listened and waited and watched and listened. And by the end of the day, no one had said one word to the Peddler. And now the Peddler of Ballagherdeen, he was afraid, because the wind was cold, and he knew he didn't have the strength to walk all the way back to his home. He only had enough strength to make his way off the bridge, and to lay down in an alley that was sheltered from the breeze. And just as his head touched the cold cobbled stones, he was asleep. And that was to be the final sleep the Peddler of Ballagherdeen ever slept. Well, had not the innkeeper come around the corner at that moment. The innkeeper who had an inn at the foot of the bridge, you see. The innkeeper who'd been watching the Peddler standing on the bridge all day long. The innkeeper who now said, "Well, so that's where you've come to. I wondered what happened to you, man. I've been watching you out my window all day long, standing on the bridge like some fool, in a stiff breeze. Now, I noticed you weren't peddling anything, you weren't begging anyone for anything. What on earth were you doing there, man? How is it with you?" But then the innkeeper noticed. The Peddler, he was so weak and so cold, he was shivering. And he said to him, "You come with me, man." He took the Peddler to his inn, and he sat him down at a table. And he gave him a bowl of stew, and he gave him a pint of ale. And the Peddler ate the best meal he'd eaten in months. And when he finished, the innkeeper said, "Now tell me, man, I've satisfied your hunger, you can satisfy my curiosity. How is it with you? What were you doing all day long standing on the Liffey Bridge?" And the Peddler, he said, "Well, you see, I had this dream, and in the dream, this voice, it spoke to me, you see." And without even listening to the end of the story, the innkeeper, he just laughed. And he said, "Man, look at you. You're daft. You're a fool. Everybody has dreams, but you don't go running off when some voice in a dream tells you to. Now, I don't know who you are, man. I don't know where you come from, but I'll tell you this much. You've got to look after yourself. You've got to care for yourself. I just saved your life. I can't be doing that again. You got to get yourself home and care for yourself, man." Well, the Peddler knew he was right. He thanked him for the food. He thanked him for saving him. And just as he was walking out the door, the innkeeper, he said, but wait a minute, man. Wait a minute. You know, that dream you had, it reminds me of a dream I had years ago. You see, years ago, in the middle of a cold winter night, St. Patrick himself appeared to me. And he said to me, he said, "Innkeeper, get up. and walked to the town of Ballagherdeen, wherever that is. And he said, there at the crossroads you'll find a mud and wattle hut, and beside it you'll find a great cherry tree growing there. And if you were to dig beneath it, you'd unearth a great chest of gold. Now where would I be, an innkeeper, a man of means, if I listened to nonsense like that? Well, the peddler, he said, you know, innkeeper, I don't rightly know where you'd be. But to himself he said, I sure know where I should be. And didn't the peddler of Ballagherdeen make his way home in 2 days and 2 nights? And there didn't he find his own shovel leaning against his own hut, and he took it. And right in his own front yard, beneath his own cherry tree, he dug, and he dug, and he dug, and sure enough, he hit something. He brushed away the dirt, and he unearthed a huge wooden chest. And when he opened it, it brimmed full of gold coins. And they say that all the good and the grand and the great things the peddler of Ballagherdeen did for the world with that gold, it is the stuff of 100 stories. And, of course, all of those stories, just like this one, finally do come to an end, you know. And that's the end of this tale known as The Peddler of Ballagherdeen, County Roscommon, Ireland. Thank you.